morning, everyone, or if you're not in the South African time zone, I guess good day. I believe we've got people dialing in from all around the world, which makes it quite exciting across South Africa, Africa, Brazil, different parts of Asia, London, Europe. So interestingly for me, a topic which I thought was rather niche, but seems to have quite an extensive interest across the globe. I'm going to do the intros in a minute with Andy, and we're going to get kick-started to try to answer what is self-sovereign identity, how's it playing out, is this the next internet effectively, it's going to be massive, or is this something which has got a lot of hype and actually nothing's going to come from the back of it? But before we get into that, I just want to hand over to Marius from Sybrin, our sponsors for today, to give the intro.
Yes, thank you, Colin, and good morning, and I guess a very good morning to our audience in the Americas, and an afternoon to our audiences in the Asia Pacific. So I hope you're all having a great day. So my name is Marius Mare. I am the Group CEO here at Sybrin. I don't want to spend any time talking about Sybrin. You know, if you want to know more about it, there is the website. Let me just say our interest or objective for today is to make a contribution to building knowledge around sovereign identity, as we think it is a key building block in our digital journeys going forward. We are joined today by Colin Iles on screen today. So Colin is the founder of Innovation Catalysts, and his objective really is to work with courageous leaders and organizations to create disruptive interventions and exponential organizations. So some of the people that I can mention that he's worked with is Michael Jordan, ex-CEO of FNB. He's worked with Dr. David Taylor, who's been ranked as one of the top 100 clinical leaders in the NHS, and Stephen van Coller, current CEO of EOH. And then also Andrew Baker, currently newly appointed Director of Engineering at AWS. Big congratulations from all of us, Andy, for landing that one. And then before that, Andy was the CTO at ABSA for a decade, and he's really been instrumental at ABSA for transforming the infrastructure, services and resource space. I speak under correction, but I think Andy almost halved ABSA's cost in that space in the time that he's been there. And so these guys will be discussing the potential of self-sovereign identity with us today. So gentlemen, over to you, and thank you once again for all of you attending.
Thank you very much, Marius. And again, welcome to everyone that's dialing in. Before I get Andy to start talking, you've all dialed in to listen to Andy, not to me. We are going to have a special guest joining us through the call. I'm going to say nothing about that just yet. I think it's going to add to the conversation quite nicely. Please, when you've got questions, make it interactive. Ask your questions, leave it in the chat, put it on the Q&A. I do pick up on the QAs a little bit quicker because it pops up and I can't quite miss them. And whatever you want to ask, just go through it. I can't promise we'll get through everything. An hour is a very limited time to get through everything that we could talk about with self-sovereign ID. Andy, welcome.
Thanks. I have to say, I know I'm going to get loads of WhatsApps for Marius's introduction. And just to cut everyone off at the legs, what you're going to send me is that I halved their cost base when I resigned. So you can't pay that joke now. Yeah, well, thanks, Cole. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, we're talking about ID, so let's just kick off with a simple question. Can you just intro yourself more formally for everyone that's dialing in that doesn't know you, if there is anyone dialing in that doesn't know you?
So yeah, my name's Andy, or Andrew Baker. I worked at Barclays on algo trading for about 10 years or 12 years, and I really enjoyed that. Before that, I was at a startup, which was huge fun. And so my background is I'm a coder and a little bit of a hacker. And yeah, and I wander. I don't have a career plan at all. I wander from problem to problem. And so I'm starting in a week's time with AWS. So I'm super stoked.
Congratulations on that one. Now, you asked me to ask you this, so I'm just going to replay it back to you. Why are you so nervous about this call?
Because this is the third time I've had this conversation, and the other two went really badly. This is actually a workshop. if you want to do it properly. And I remember I sat with Kayla, I think her Twitter handle was like the Identity Woman, for a day. And I took a load of work into that meeting because I thought, oh, hey, you know, identity, username, password, can't be more than an hour's worth of information in that. And as I sat there, I realized this is huge. This is such a big problem. And I've reflected on it quite a lot. And funnily enough, I'll give you one example of where identity kind of backfired on me a little bit. And there's a couple that I've done in my career. So when I was at Barclays Capital, I sent an email as a joke to a colleague from Bob Diamond. And I basically told them they were fired, you know, right? Which obviously is a joke. If I got an email from the CEO saying you're fired, you would immediately know it's not real, right? But that colleague burst into tears, right? You know, and legit believed that email was real and that they'd been fired. And that was the point when I realized, like, identity is really broken, right? That people genuinely believe if they get something electronic, and obviously phishing came after that, but if they get something electronically, they legitimately believe it. Shortly afterwards, something called DKIM came out for emails, and we've got this identity problem in everything that we do. So we also, at one of my previous companies, hacked the network. There was a thing called HSRP, and it does a plain text hello. And me and this other guy, we hacked it, and eventually we end up with the CISO's credentials. We worked our way up through the network and logged into the HR system which we thought was really cool, but also got into a huge amount of trouble for that as well. So this is a topic dear to my heart, because if you want to do anything naughty in life, you start off with identity, and it's been done terribly. So I hope I don't duff this, because it's such an important conversation. And I don't want the next Andrew Baker to have such an easy time that I had.
Okay, all right. Let's see how we go on. I'm getting a bit of static when you're talking. I don't know about guys on the call if you're also getting a bit of static when Andy's talking there. Just post back on the participants and we'll see if we can sort out the sound a little bit. While we wait for that feedback to see if we need, they got crystal clear, so it's just on my side. That's awesome. All right. Now, when we were prepping for this, this idea of identity, the sort of realization for me is that identity is a bit irrelevant when I'm just myself by myself. It's always contextual, and it always relies on the interaction in certain circumstances with others. Could you extend on that?
Yeah, well, like that. So I guess what you're saying is, for you, in your group of friends, identity is irrelevant. I'll let you think about that one for a second. You're absolutely right, Colin. Yes, identity is contextual. So, for me, I have an identity in my family, right? My kids see me as their dad, my wife sees me. All right,
we've got a few people saying there's a bit of static and you're cutting out. Anything you can solve on your side? This is always the problem when we do these things live. It's always should we pre-record this and just publish? But then obviously we lose out on the audience interaction, the questions that you want to ask, but just bear with us.
There's nothing I can do, Bob. Is it still really bad? Yikes. Just try logging in again. Maybe that's not working.
We can do that, or you can try your headphones.
Okay. Give it a go. Okay, it says headphones. Okay, are you hearing anything different?
Let's see how it goes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think it's coming through okay.
Okay. All right.
If not, we'll have to get you to log back in and see how that sorts things out. So yeah, contextual.
Yes.
Contextual.
So identity is contextual. Obviously, we have a job, so I have an identity there. I have an email address. Everything. We have many different contexts to our identity, and unfortunately, we have to manage all of those independently. And I guess that's where self-sovereign is super exciting to me. And again, the other thing that stands out to me is if you put an Africa lens on it as well, we have very poor identity for a large portion of our population, especially when you consider it digitally. And for me, I think that that must be a massive obstacle from a service perspective. So enabling banking for unbanked, right at the core of that is identity issues. So I think if we get this right, not only will it remove admin risk and fraud, it will create a huge opportunity from a financial inclusion perspective.
Okay. You said that when you have been growing up, you've been a little bit naughty and been having a bit of fun with identity. What is actually the real threat? How significant is identity where we're currently at in terms of whether it's physical or whether it's on the internet in terms of how we interact with each other?
So even before, I mean, so obviously, I'm going to throw COVID into this as well, right? So before COVID came up, identity was an issue, and it created quite a lot of admin. So if you lost your credentials, in the fact the company that I used to work for would send you into a branch, and you'd have to physically render yourself in order to get trusted to get your ID reset. But now obviously COVID has come in, and the push to digitize services has increased dramatically. So identity is a huge problem. And just think about a few things here. So I remember previously, around about 30 or 40% of our call center volumes were people asking to get their username and password reset. Now, not only is that a nightmare, that to do that service, but obviously there's a huge amount of fraud on that, because the person who's calling you to get the password reset, there's a high likelihood that that's not actually the person who owns the account. So it creates a terrible customer experience because there's no trust at that point. Why do you need your password reset? Well, I've forgotten it. A fraudster will have also forgotten it. So that's one aspect to it. You did see an interesting data point in the banking survey between, I think, this year and the previous year. And the biggest jump for any bank in terms of customer satisfaction was when one of the banks started accepting fraud. They started paying out fraud. They started saying, well, if you have fraud in your account, we'll help you recover the funds. And other banks don't do that. If you lose money through fraud, through phishing, through whatever, because identity is so weak, it can be life impacting. Your whole life savings gone, and the bank is saying, I'm not going to pay you back. So you can imagine the complaints that you get, and the anger and the trauma that creates, because there is no root of trust on digital identity. If you think about the internet itself, you've got DNS. So the only identity on the internet is the thing that you're going to. It's never the source, it's always the destination. And that's where Sovrin comes in and completely turns the game around its head, so that both parties know who's dealing with who.
Right. Now, it's not fair, is it, though? I mean, there's some terrible stuff going on. I mean, I was looking at some interesting stats before the call. They reckon that 10% of digital online customers facing the major e-retailers are fake, fraudulent in one way or another. I'm sure it's the same for banks, that there's billions being spent in the UK alone. And if you multiply that up globally, gosh, tens, hundreds of billions actually being spent on trying to prevent fraud and actually understand the identity of your customers. It sounds like it's a big issue, but there has been some progress made to date, surely.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. So if you go back 10 years, everything was a username and password. And there's definitely been some level of standardization that's come through for certain services, right? So you definitely see the adoption of these federated identity providers like Google, like Facebook, and for a lot of people, for certain types of services, that for some people, that is an acceptable method of identifying yourself. Where it gets a bit more interesting is, those companies have had massive data spills. Not all of them, just to be clear, but some of them. And if you go to a site called, I think it's called Have I Been Pawned? Just be very careful how you spell that. You'll put your email address in. You will see whether your credentials have been leaked out from one of these federated identity providers. And where people get even more excited is they change the terms and conditions. So you saw recently, I think it was this year or last year, where WhatsApp suddenly said, look, I'm going to start sharing your data with Facebook. And people don't like that. They want to own identity. Some people are okay with that, but it's not for everyone. So what I really like about self-sovereign identity is the person, the individual, for the first time ever, actually owns their own credentials. And that is a game changer.
Okay. Facebook and Google, I think most people will recognize that process, this federated model, when you go and log into your favorite sort of eBay or e-commerce platform, because you're going to get the three options: enter, create your sign in with an email, or go and click the big Facebook button, or go and click the big Google button. What's wrong with that? Why can't we trust Google and Facebook particularly, perhaps, as they're in the news, to go and manage that service for us?
Yeah, I mean, so my big problem with that is that you become the product, right? And it's literally, if you've ever watched on Netflix, I think it's called Social Dilemma, you start to understand the industry that sits behind that type of service, or can sit behind that type of service. By the way, I'm not saying that this is necessarily a good, bad, or indifferent thing. I'm saying that there should be a choice. So my kids don't care. They're like, fine, they can send me, better marketing, right? For some people, this is a fine thing, but for others, they don't like it. They find it a bit creepy. And so yeah, my challenge is that, where is the neutral way of identifying yourself without creating 500 sets of credentials? And unfortunately, they all have different password rules. They all, I mean, when I log into AWS now, it gives me that captcha thing, like the letters. If you log in as a root account, I am a robot. I can't read it. So it's very successful. I can't log into my own flipping account. And why have they done that? Because they want, they want to stop fake logins, right? And if you have a proper digital identity, you wouldn't need those kinds of, that capture stuff would go in the bin. Yes.
All right, so huge amounts of fraud, huge amounts of friction in the system. And then even if we just look at where we're at now with these kind of single sign-ons and multi-sign-on applications, we're basically selling ourselves as the product so that Facebook can watch what we're surfing, which sites that we go to, and take their identity in for their own marketing machine is where we're currently at. How is Sovrin going to potentially solve this? I guess before that is, what is Sovrin trying to do? How does it work?
So it's, we, just for everyone's benefit, we've had several prep talks about how we get through this next part of the conversation. And so my strategy here is high level, and actually to direct people where they can take energy about where to go with this, right? So I'm not going to go into the weeds. I'm going to try and stay above it. Sovrin, at its heart, is the internet of identity, right? So it's got the main principles of the internet. No one owns it. Everyone can use it, and anyone can improve it. Right, so those are your three kind of tenets of self-sovereign identity, and I think that already starts to get people interested. So if what you can't have in an identity network is, a identity god that owns it, that dishes it out, that can revoke it for you, right? The individual has to own their own identity. And so, when I was involved in my previous company, we did a lot of work in creating an identity wallet. I really hope that makes its way into production. And they've worked with various partners. I think Old Mutual have been involved, BankServe have been involved, and there's a lot of energy. And I think we've got Lohan hopefully to come on just now and start to talk about where the industry is. But if that gets into the wild, that's a huge thing. I'll be the first person to download and use that. And what it is essentially a digital, and you think about it, I'm just going to take a little step back. If a policeman stops you, he says, right, show me your driving license, and you show him your driving license, that is a self-sovereign moment. Okay, he didn't take your data away with you. He didn't take your card off of you. You proved to him that you have a license. He saw that it is verifiable, and that's the world my wallet sits with me now. My license is still in my pocket, and I satisfied that requirement to prove that I have a driving license. In the digital world, it's opposite. All your data goes away. It gets sent into these silos. It gets distributed between different companies, and if the self-sovereign thing comes alive, it becomes an industry standard, the issuers of these credentials stay the same, right? So Home Affairs is still the only person that can issue an ID, a Home Affairs ID, but they can do it digitally into my wallet, right? So it takes a huge amount of friction out. I own my wallet. It sits with me in my pocket, in my phone. And if I want to share stuff with people, I can. If I don't have to. And I can be very selective about what I share. I don't have to share everything. I can share subsets of data. I can join different credentials together. So this is what I'm trying to stay superficial. It is like an identity utopia. And from a customer experience perspective, where the success of Sovrin is it feels extremely natural. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, Colin, maybe you can post that. There's a demo that we did where you onboard yourself into a wallet. I think I sent it you last night. And then you go and create a bank account. And just watch that for how awesome the customer experience is from a digital identity perspective.
Yeah, I'll send that link over in a second. Do you want to give us an online example? I don't know whether you want to go and use my name or Jimmy. What is it that everyone always uses when they talk about blockchain? Is it Alice and Bob?
The cryptology is Bob and Alice, yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to call up a little slide there to help you. Hopefully that's coming through okay. But I wanted to try to understand this idea of the holder, the issuer, and the verifier, perhaps with a little example where, I don't know, I'm going in and taking a loan from a bank or hiring a car.
Okay, so depending on what credentials you need, you might need many things, but we'll take it from for this argument, will be very simple. We'll just say, I need your identity number, your Home Affairs identity number. So the issuer for that is Home Affairs. Okay, and they issue you that ID number to the holder, who's Colin. We're going to use you, Colin, not Bob and Iles. So now you've got a Home Affairs identity number, and it's in your wallet, and it's a verifiable credential. So that's key. We know that the only person who can issue that is Home Affairs. It's all baked in cryptology goodness. Please don't ask me to go into the PKI infrastructure. And so it's in the wallet now, and then I'm Andrew, I'm the banker, obviously in this example. I need to know that Colin has a Home Affairs ID. And so I ask him for a proof, and he sends that to me. And I can compare that using cryptology to what's on the public blockchain. Now, here's the key part, right? Just so everyone doesn't get too excited. The encrypted private data does not go on the blockchain, right? So what some of the things people get excited about is like, does that mean all my data is on a blockchain? Nope, it's not, right? All that gets put on a blockchain is a distributed digital identity and a signing key, right? No actual data goes there. The data stays with the holder in the wallet. And so when you want to share the data, you share the data, whatever else goes with the ID, the expiry date or whatever, the date of birth, whatever else is on there, you share that to the verifier and they can verify it. And there are different techniques to verifying it depending on how that proof needs to happen. There's something very interesting called zero knowledge proof, which I am definitely not going into. But that's a very interesting concept that's in Sovrin. And so, yeah, it's a very beautiful, very simplistic system that is extremely secure and extremely safe.
Okay, now it struck me there's two technologies that have driven this, which is why we didn't have this opening up to us a decade or so back. Cryptology, so the private and the public key mechanism that we see on a day-to-day basis when we're, I don't know, logging into Google, or Google's on our behalf logging into other platforms for us. And then this idea of the blockchain, right? Distributed ledger technology. So I know you don't want to go into it, but could you just at a high level, particularly on DLTs, is this the same as the way that things like Bitcoin and Ethereum work?
Okay, that's a good question. No, it's not. It's similar, but it's not the same. So I'll point out the key differences. So obviously the thing that Bitcoin gets quite a hard time about is this proof of work, which uses up a huge amount of power, and people are unhappy with the environmental impact of that. So that consensus algorithm is not used in Sovrin. So it doesn't use a proof of work. There's no hashing, there's no miners or anything like that on this. And the reason why that's the case is it is a public ledger, so it's available in the public, but it is permissioned. So that means that I, for example, cannot go and start writing spurious entries on the Sovrin ledger, on the Sovrin network. I need to get go through a governance process in order to become what's called a sovereign steward, and that will allow me to publish credentials onto the network. So it is, it's a bit like you've got the same thing as well. From a DNS, you've got certificate authorities on the internet, and you've got people who provide DNS infrastructure as well. So it's similar in that sense. You've got a governance framework around this.
Andy, thank you very much. We've got Lohan, who is our mystery guest. It's no longer a mystery because Andy told you about 5 or 10 minutes ago, and I'm sure you could all work it out from the attendee list. But the quasi-mystery guest, Lohan. Lohan, do you want to just give a quick 2-minute intro about, well, you don't know why. I'm very excited to have you on when I look at your CV, but specifically with regard to sovereign identity.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the sovereign identity space pretty much since the beginning. Before, let's say, after it came out of an academic sphere into the actual real application in 2015, 2016. I've been a major evangelist and advocate for this technology, and also been part of most of the initiatives in South Africa regarding getting this off the ground from an ecosystem perspective. And I'm also serving as an ex officio board of a Sovrin Foundation and also the chair of a steward council.
Awesome. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is because now we're starting to move away from the detail. Andy didn't go into too much detail, but at least from my perspective, I've got a slightly better idea about how the blockchain is helpful to actually go and start sharing an ID in a safe, secure, immutable way, where I can actually dictate to people how they use it, and third parties can be brought in to verify the data and the credentials that I'm sharing. So it sounds wonderful compared to what I'm used to. Okay. But what I don't understand is how this has actually been created. I mean, this is open source on steroids. It's being looked at globally. Who on earth started this, and why?
So if you look at identity from the old world perspective, we never really owned any of our identities. If you take an email address, if you take a bank account, your telephone number for that example, none of those identifiers really belong to you. We always rented them. As soon as you close your bank account, you lose your bank account identifier. As soon as you change mobile number, you basically lose your mobile number. So the only way that we could have, and the reason for that is because most of it was centralized. Some institution vouched or gave you some identifier, and you used it as long as you have an account or as long as you use the service. And to solve the problem, to really solve the problem of self-sovereign identity, we needed a solution just like Bitcoin is basically replacing the intermediary trust in banks and putting the trust into the mathematics of the blockchain or the protocol itself. We needed a solution to move away from a centralized institution and into this notion of DLT blockchain, where everybody can trust the same ledger, but they can effectively operate on an open ecosystem level. And to solve the problem of self-sovereign identity or digital identity in general, we never really could do that until the blockchain, the concept of blockchain came along. Because once that happened, we could actually start by providing identities and say, you know what, everybody can play this game, everybody can issue and utilize the notion of digital identity, but all of us trust this distributed or decentralized network to make sure that we know who is who and who share what information within this ecosystem. So it was really a technological breakthrough that made this identity concept or self-sovereign identity a reality.
Now, a lot of people, going back to what Andy said, and perhaps we'll ask you for your opinion about whether Andy got it right later on. Maybe we'll do that after the call. I don't know. Let's see how things go. But it was just starting to go into the sort of DLT side of things and the difference. You know, we've got a situation where you're setting up a permissioned public DLT, which is different to the permissionless one that we know and love from Bitcoin, for example. And this, to me, is where I'm a little bit nervous now, because what you're essentially saying is there is some sort of controlling entity dictating how this infrastructure is created, right? And the systems and the flows and the processes that go with it, as opposed to Bitcoin. Okay, fine, anyone can participate, it's its own machine, no one can control it. I'm worried about, we're moving from, the banks have got the control at the moment about your ID, or the Home Affairs have got the control about your ID, to something where now a new body has been created, your body that you're working for, which will now control how this this ID information is stored, aggregated and utilized.
So yes and no. I think the realistic answer to that is when this whole concept of self-sovereign identity started, especially Sovrin, we couldn't really utilize Bitcoin or Ethereum. Number one, at that point, it wasn't very scalable. Number two, the governance around it was kind of non-existent. It's this decentralized network. Whatever happens on that network happens, and you can't go back to like a bank and say, hey, I lost my money or I lost my private key. That is true decentralization. But for identity, the Sovrin Foundation came up with a concept that we need a bit of both. We need governance and we need a network that operates in a public permission fashion. So that is something that a lot of government institutions and corporates can buy into, because there is a governing body. There's a very robust governance framework that supports the network. And then on the other side, you have the network itself. And the combination of the two actually opened a lot of doors, because institutions can believe in the governance, they can go and read the governance, they can understand exactly how it's operated, how it's maintained. And then the network should also operate under this governance framework. So it a beautiful implementation of how you can prove where you can utilize the concepts of DLP and blockchain, but still bring it a bit back into the old world and not this complete decentralized, unmanaged to a degree ledger. So that is really why Sovrin actually had such a massive uptake to date, is because we have a balance between the governance and the network itself.
Is this essentially similar to ICANN, which is, governing our internet protocols?
It is very similar. It is a bit more decentralized, a bit more distributed, but you can use that analogy to. It is kind of similar in the sense.
I hope yours isn't an acronym. I've always thought it's the most boring. Imagine having a job there, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. I don't know if I'd be particularly excited about that. But anyway, right. So we're up and running. How did it form? Who started it? And who is now participating in this ecosystem?
So the Sovrin Foundation, or let's say the open source component, started with Evening in 2015, 2016. They were effectively a commercial SSI venture, and they came up with this open source technology that ultimately ended up being Hyperledger Indy. That is the underlying blockchain component or DLT component of it. But they soon realized that as a commercial entity, you can't be providing a global public utility and be a commercial entity. Then they decided to donate the code base to Sovrin Foundation to split the commercial interest and the governance and the operating part of the two of the network. One is commercial and then one is the foundation. The Sovrin Foundation then donated the code base to operate under the Hyperledger community. And from there on, Evening continued on their commercial journey, and then the Sovrin Foundation is effectively a non-profit organization. And our role and our commitment is to operate the longest running self-sovereign identity purpose-built self-sovereign identity ledger in the world. It's running now for 5 years, mainnet. We are the largest SSI-based network in the world. And of course, there are multiple different networks depending on where you are and what you want to do. So we have builder net, staging net, and then production is a Sovrin mainnet.
All right. So
that's kind of where it started.
Last foundational question, and I want to turn to some of the questions coming through from the attendees here is which countries are involved in the setup of the foundation? I'm particularly interested to know whether you've got China and some of the other Asian countries heavily involved.
So from a board member perspective, we have board members, well, for me, South Africa, Canada, America, India, a lot of Europeans. We don't have any Chinese board members at the moment. Of course, the network is a public permission network, but we allow effectively, if you apply, anyone can become a steward. So I'm not 100% sure. I'm not part of a steward qualification committee, so I'm not sure what interest or involvement there is from a Chinese perspective at this stage. But how the network functions is that you have the stewards. They are the people who actually operate the network itself. But the stewards don't necessarily have the ability to write to the network. To write to the network, we have a concept called transaction endorser. And anyone in the world can go and apply for that. There's a verification and validation process. And once you are a transaction endorser, then and only then do you have the ability to write to the network. So those are effectively the people that can write to the network and start to allow people to build ecosystems on top of the Sovrin network. But ultimately, the idea of Sovrin is identity for all and to be a global public utility for any type of self-sovereign identity ecosystem.
Okay, and the transaction endorsers, are these typically going to be trusted organizations like banks, maybe some of the big tech companies?
Absolutely. So one of them would be in South Africa. We have ABSA and myself. We are only two stewards and endorsers on the network from a South Africa perspective. I'm not sure that we have a lot more on the African region. But yeah, normally it is high trusted organizations. There are a few startups as well. It's a mix and match. But what will happen is, of course, the more trusted organizations will be able to build a bigger ecosystem around them, where the lower trusted organizations will have a bit of a more difficult time, but they can still achieve the same objectives at the end of the day.
Okay. Now, let's turn to some of the questions. This one from Lawrence, I'm just going to add to it ever so slightly. On one of the write-ups, I saw a nice analogy that if you get this working and it goes globally, it's very much like the transformation we saw in manufacturing with just-in-time. And what I mean by that is when you're sharing your credentials, are you sending over large amounts of data and it's being pooled and stored and people are going to have to manage that? Or is it rather the case where it's more transactional, where the data that I've got, there's a call on it, someone wants it, I'm getting a loan overdraft approved, I'm trying to hire a car, and then after that point in time, it's disappeared again. If they want to go and use the data, they're going to be calling it again for some other transactional purpose. Does that make sense, Lohan?
Is it for me, the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So,
or Andy.
So yeah, Andy, if you want to take it, I can take it, doesn't matter.
So yes, if you read I'll take a little bit and then maybe hand over to you, Lohan. If you read the Inevitable Rise of Self-Sovereign Identity, it does talk about sort of just-in-time identity. And I guess what you're driving at here is, I think right now there's a tendency to bulk up on knowing everything about somebody in case they want to use a certain type of product. So you kind of load up on their credentials. But because self-sovereign identity is so frictionless, you move towards a just-in-time model. You know what you need to know at any given point in time. So it is a lot more immediate, right? The sharing of the data is, and I guess the other benefit of just-in-time is that you get a much better reachability. So one of the things that we saw in South Africa recently with a Debbie Check initiative was how difficult it is to reach your customer base, because when you open a current account, we get you in, we capture all your credentials, and then we don't speak to you for 5 years or 10 years. And meanwhile, you move address, you change your phone number, you change your email. And so one of the things that this just-in-time sort of identity gives is that you have current data. When I want to reach somebody, I can go off to their wallet and say, hey, I need your cell number. They can approve or reject that, but you end up with less propensity to store and squirrel away a snapshot of the customer data. You know you can always reach them on a wallet and get the information that you want at any point in time. And it was interesting for me in the early stages of Debbie Check, some of the banks were struggling to get 50% of their customers through digital channels or emails or SMS. So I think this is the banks will recognize that having access to a customer when they want and getting live records is a game changer.
Yeah, it does. For me, I just would like to add something to that. The just-in-time concept is really powerful, because if you look at what's happening in the identity world today, it's not just in time. It is a point in time, and what happens is they store that point in time version of your identity. And the reality, the freshness of that data is normally, it can be outdated within a day, it can be outdated within 2 weeks. So just in time completely shifts the paradigm, because first of all, the bank don't need to store that information. They can just go and request it whenever they need to, meaning they get the fresh data whenever they request it, the most up-to-date data. And if you really are concerned that the bank or a institution receiving this information, that you don't want to divulge information that you don't want them to effectively store, then you can go into the world where self-sovereign identity supports these two concepts, which we call selective disclosure and zero-knowledge proofs. And that is where you can say, hey, you know what, I am over the certain age, or I receive a salary within a certain threshold, but you don't actually disclose the underlying raw data. So you have a lot of power in your hands around what you want to share just in time and in what format you want to share that information.
Pulling up this picture again to support a question from Mark Plummer. He says, can the issuer revoke a credential? I.e., like my ID number or fingerprint. For example, Home Office gets hacked and needs to reissue all identities.
Absolutely. Revocation is a key component of self-sovereign identity. Without revocation, a lot of use cases will just not be feasible. So credentials can be issued, and at any point in time, the issuer can go and revoke that credential. Meaning, as soon as the holder then reuses that for verification, it is still verifiable. It will still be, you will still be able to prove who the issuer was of that credential, but it will also come with this extra attribute that says this credential you can still verify, but it is revoked. And then the receiver, the verifier, can then make a decision. What do they want to do with that credential in a revoked state? Sometimes revoked credentials can actually still prove valuable. It all depends, once again, on the context and what you want to do. But revocation is indeed part of the protocols.
What's your view in terms of where this takes the existing authentication processes? So our username or email and password, for example, could this start to see the decline or even end of having that to be authenticated and share our IDs?
Absolutely. I mean, self-sovereign identity by default effectively is a authentication mechanism to completely eliminate usernames and passwords. And you further increase the authentication and the trust in the authentication, because the authentication happens right from the edge to the service. It's not like in the federated model where I authenticate myself to a centralized party and then that centralized party might federate for me. It actually happens peer-to-peer from the edge to the receiver. So if anything changes on the edge, the authentication will immediately be invalidated. Or if anything changes on the server side, again, the authentication will immediately fail. So yes, this is definitely a solution that can eliminate usernames and passwords completely, and not only eliminate usernames and passwords. What you can do is you can even authenticate and share data in the same process. It's like, imagine you have a Facebook page and Facebook don't store your photo, your name, your surname, nothing. It's this blank blue page. And you inject your authentication plus your information, and it renders for the duration of your session. If you close your session, they don't have your username, they don't have your profile picture, your name, your surname. That's kind of what is coming in this Web3 world, is where there's information minimization on the server side, and you inject what you want depending on the context and when you need it.
And actually, that's a good point. At a simplistic level, you mentioned email. Now, email is a universal identifier. And the other issue you've got with the universal identifier is correlation. So different entities, if they share Colin's email address and say, this is Colin and this is what he did, they can start to build a picture across multiple services and multiple trust boundaries. What's interesting about Sovrin is you have many DIDs. You don't, your information is not represented as one entity. So Colin, we talked about the multiple contexts of Colin. You will have many DIDs, many identifiers for you. So you won't be replaced with one sovereign token or one sovereign identity. When you log into each different service that you use, it will be a different one if you want it to be that way. And that's beautiful, because there can be no correlation. Nobody can share your data across boundaries because they can't join it back to the same entity unless you want to enable that.
So everything you've said so far, Lohan, makes it, yeah.
I just wanted to add something there, because I think this is also very important. Like Andy mentioned, a lot of organizations get hacked, and then you lose your email, your password, you lose a lot of personal information. In this world, even if you use self-sovereign identity for authentication, even if the server side, the solution gets hacked, they have a useless number. They can't do anything with it. They can't even re-authenticate with that number. Which makes it much stronger than a lot of authentication mechanisms we use today, especially username and password.
All right, but it sounds amazing. The theory goes, I've got my wallet, my virtual wallet now on my phone, on my desktop, and I've started to store credentials within it. and I'm now going out into the real world, or I'm going out online and I'm looking to go and do something with this, buy something, get a job, apply for a university, get a loan, and 1,001 other cases where you need to go and share your identity. The success of this hinges on the fact that there's a set of people that will verify the accuracy of that information. There will be the proof that says, yes, this is Colin, and he definitely does have that degree, or he has that driving license, or this is his age, or whatever it is. This is his home address. What I don't understand is how you're going to get those people to participate in that particular ecosystem.
I can talk
Lohan.
about a little. I can start with that a little bit. So we talked at the start the cost of the missing identity layer, right? So if you take a bank or if you take home affairs, everybody wants to now create a digital experience for their products and services, and all of them need to use some form of identification. So to be honest with you, it's actually harder not to use something like Sovrin. I think you'll see some big tech. There's two ways this will go. A big tech company. I think I saw recently Microsoft were quite active in this space. The thing that I posted on my LinkedIn was from IBM. So I think one of the big tech players can grab this and say, look, to log into my platform, we're going to use Sovrin. The other way of doing it will be financial institutions. They've got regulations coming all the time, the POPI, FATF, GDPR. These are horrible regulations to deal with, create a huge amount of work. If they move towards a sub-sovereign type framework or solution, it hugely reduces the burden on them. Call center volumes drop. So there are some strong commercial drivers, regulatory drivers, and fraud drivers that will push this through. And the thing that I really like about Sovrin is it doesn't matter who goes for this. It's a community play, and that's kind of why we're doing this call today. The more participants, the better the framework becomes. So I'm not sure I can guess who's going to be, who's going to go first here, but I'm pretty sure once you've got a couple of million people using self-sovereign wallets, when somebody goes into a hospital and they say, can you capture your name and address and ID number here? People will start complaining, why aren't you using Sovrin? I could just scan a QR code and you can get, so I think once people get used to it in a few contexts, when you go to the gym, you'll just say use Sovrin. People will start to get annoyed with having to, the number of times I get forms that say capture your details here. And so, the same with SnapScan. When they came out, they changed the paradigm. So people just wanted to use that, and they pushed, restaurants and shops to start adopting it. So I think people will use it and they'll go, this is an awesome experience, and then you'll start to get pressure on entities to adopt it.
What about from your perspective? You're in the trenches here, Lohan. What are the main obstacles you've got to get through as a community before this does start to get that take up that Andy's talking about?
SSI is a hard problem. It solves a very, very complex identity problem. But on the other side, the hard problem of SSI is to bootstrap an ecosystem. And to bootstrap an ecosystem, you need two pieces. You need technology. By now, the SSI technology is very mature. It's been proven to work in a lot of different use cases. So the other aspect that you need is the governance. And we are lucky that in South Africa, we have quite a lot of people that believe in this technology. That's been part of the projects or the projects like BankServe. And the whole idea there is really to work on both sides, is to work on the governance and to work on bootstrapping the ecosystem. And once you start bootstrapping the ecosystems, especially if you work from a high trust environment like proof of bank account, KYC, proof of medical aid, what will happen is you will get the issuers that issue these credentials. And very quickly after that, you will see that the verification part of the market, I don't know, going to a doctor or whatever you want to do with these credentials, I think you'll see a very quick follow on from the verification side as soon as you get the issuer ecosystem up and running, because it alleviates so much friction and inefficiencies in the systems today. Like Andy said, I mean, if you walk into a doctor, instead of filling in another form, you scan a QR code, you share your information, verifiable, and there you are. You sit and you wait for your appointment. And even then, if you walk out with a digital script. But the reality is you need governance, you need technology, and you need to bootstrap an ecosystem. And that is a slow process, but it's like dominoes falling. The first 1, 2, 3 might be hard, but after that, it just starts snowballing.
Where's the focus at the moment, Lohan? Have you got case studies already out there in the wild which are giving you good data about pickup and how much this is being utilized?
So yes, I mean, from a South African perspective, we have projects going on to really bootstrap an ecosystem. The BankServe project, together with a lot of banks, insurers, etc., they're now pulling in home affairs, telecommunication companies. That is one project in South Africa to get it off the ground. But if you look from a global perspective, there are a lot of projects globally, like the IATA travel pass. One of these days, you'll be able to prove your COVID vaccination or your PCR test via SSI. It's already been used by quite a lot of airlines, and it will just scale out globally. You have Germany as a country looking at adopting SSI. You have the European Union. You have Canada as a country adopting SSI. So there are a lot of projects currently that are looking at this technology, and it's going quite quick in terms of looking at it until they get to a point where they actually start using it. So since the beginning, let's say 2015, 2016, over the past 2 years specifically, and actually thanks to COVID, it just catapulted the need for digital capabilities, especially when it comes to identity, because every single thing you do in some form or fashion always boil down to identity. And having a digital identity that is verifiable will just unlock so many use cases. And we can see it globally. There's actually a map that I can send you a link to that currently lists all the different projects around the world.
When are we going to start seeing it at the retail level, Andy? When am I going to, next time I log on to Zoom, it's going to offer me Facebook, Google, and Sovrin org single SSI?
That's very hard to predict. I don't think it's complicated for that to happen, and I do think that, you know, it was only a few years ago when Facebook and Google were added as federated identities, and I don't see. I mean, as I said before, I've seen some movement at the top of houses of some big tech companies who are trying to solve digital identity. So I don't see it as a long journey. If I had to guess, I'd expect next year, you know, and that sounds quite aggressive, but I expect somebody will pick this up next year. I'd be very surprised if you didn't see one of the big tech companies offering self-sovereign identity from a login perspective. What's beautiful about South Africa is that, you know, we've got Home Affairs with an API to verify people's identity. So we've got like it's nice that we've got a national identity scheme which you can access over an API to verify people's bios versus, you know, their picture on Home Affairs. So South Africa is quite in a fairly unique position that we can, if we decide to go for a technology like this, we can quickly end up with, you know, very strong verified credentials at scale in these wallets. So I think the opportunity in South Africa is massive, and I'd be very surprised if one of the financial institutions or one of the small startups, there's a number of companies I've spoken to in Stellenbosch and in Cape Town area where they're definitely aggressively looking at self-sovereign to solve some very weird and wonderful types of problems.
If I'm working in a corporate or an institution, particularly if I'm interested on the customer side, the sales side, or customer experience, customer journey sort of things, should I already be getting heavily invested in my time to go and understand this and to go and create a competitive advantage, or is it a bit premature? Just while you're answering that, we're going to get Marius back on the call as well.
So I'll take it initially. I'll put it a slightly different way. If I look at the big retailers in South Africa, simple example, and they're offering loyalty schemes, you know, they've got some need for some level of digital identity for those schemes, and I think there's probably quite a cost to running those schemes. So even if you take gyms as another example, you know, or health companies as another example, all of those sit with significant costs to run the schemes in a different way, right? So it's not like you're not doing identity. I think the key part is everyone has to have this as a grudge purchase, and everyone's doing it badly, right? So my view is you're crazy not to participate in this, because it's the thought that's gone into this. As I said, I sat in that whole day session with Kayla, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. And it is such a comprehensive framework, and it's done so well that it's crazy to solve it in any other way. So yeah, I think anyone who's looking at launching any kind of digital service, I'm starting using Easy Equities recently, and I almost wept when I created my login, because you have to create your Easy Equities login. You can't use an email, and I'm like, yes, another new company, a startup that's gone with an old school username and password identity. So for anyone out there that's looking at doing any kind of digital content, I think this is a much better place to land.
Thanks, Andy. Marius, welcome. You're on mute. There you go.
Back here, Andy. Back, Colin.
Marius, we can hear you.
Yeah. So just a few conclusions. I think maybe one remark that I want to share, and maybe as an invite to our audience. I'm not sure, Colin, if we've answered all the questions, but I think it's a little bit like, when I still studied the prof told me it's one of those things, the more you know how little you know. And I don't know if it was aimed at me specifically, but I do think it is a holistic remark. So as you go into this conversation, I'm sure there's lots of people on the call that would want to know more. So Colin, if we can post these questions and attempt to answer them on just follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll maybe take those as topics and answer the questions on that platform. I think that will be a useful mechanism to do that. And I think there's the question about how do we bootstrap the ecosystem. It always reminds me of the work of Joel Barker back in the 80s. I think profoundly said that it's one of those things. If the paradigm shift, we all go back to zero. And I think as these things are starting to become easier, there will be a point where the paradigm will shift, and then we'll see real takeoff. And I think in the meantime, there are very practical use cases that we can follow to use SSID in closed loop environments to make it easier for consumers, and then they'll have a good experience. I mean, typically, if we bank with, or we with a big M&O and those kind of things, every time that you've got a new product, you need to go through an eKYC process over and over and over again. And I think in these closed loop environments, if people start using these systems, rather, consumers are going to see how beautiful it is, and then we're going to see pull, from the consumer, and that's going to tip this into a new scale. But thank you very much to you guys, Andy, Lohan, for doing this, Colin for hosting. We really appreciate your time. To the audience, we hope that you've learned something in this. As I said, post questions, we'll attempt to answer more of that. And then maybe just an invite to all of you, and just look out for us in a couple of weeks' time. We're going to do a similar event with Andy, and this time we're going to talk about financial crime, and our speaker is going to be Nick Swingler, who's the head of financial crime and compliance at Absa Bank. So look out for that as we try to build some more knowledge around this new thing that faces us around identity and crime in the digital world. Thanks, Colin. I think that's that from me, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius, and thank you everyone for attending. If you get time to just leave a note, but we're going to cut the call in a minute. You might not be able to get the whole sentence in. I loved it. I hated it. This was awesome. But if you want to share feedback, just email me. You should have that in your inbox. We will try to get the questions answered and email. I'm not putting Lohan and Andy on the spot, but I'll do my best to try to go and steal another half an hour of their time to get back to you. And as Marius said, we look forward to seeing you in a month or so with Nick Swingler. It's going to be actually on the 24th of November at 10 o'clock, same time. So until then, we'll see you then. Stay safe. Thank you very much, everyone.